Okay, so next up we have Daniel Bearup, and he is from maths at the University of Kent, and he's going to talk on continuous assessment and feedback in a mathematical model. So over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Phil. I'm just loading up my screen now. Hopefully, we'll see. Hopefully everybody can see it. I should also check everybody can hear me. This is what I have to do at the start of every session now.
Yes, we can. Yes.
Excellent. Okay, let's find. I've left my talk there. Oh, darn! That's the easy one. The first one. There we go. No. Come on. Ah, there it is. Right. Okay. So I can't see you, you can see me, hopefully. Right, so as Phil says, I'm talking about continuous feedback and assessment in a maths module. I would like to point out that this is a slightly different context to what many of you may be used to. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to how we teach in maths, because I realise some people may not realise quite what we do. So certainly every time I've talked to humanities and social science colleagues, I have been confused by what they do, and they have been confused what I do. Oh, I can hear myself. That's not ideal. Now I can't, because I've muted myself. Right, okay. So this is a brief outline of business as usual in a maths module. So we would have content delivery, which would mostly take the form of formal lectures in which we would frankly be standing up at the front and talking, and students would mostly not ask questions, much though we would like to. The most significant question I have ever had in a lecture was, "Have you made a mistake there, sir?" They very rarely comment on the actual content. So just to explain my color coding as well, I'm using these blue boxes to indicate stuff I'm doing, and an orange color to indicate the stuff the student's doing. And I'm blurring them together. I'm suggesting this is more where we work together. So we would often have in those lectures, I try to break them up, so do my colleagues, by inserting little exercises inside the lecture. We encourage the student to do that. We would often walk around and check to see what they're doing, and maybe we'd have a brief personal contact then, but then we'd be expecting them to take those exercises outside of the lecture, continue working on them, and bringing them back to what we call examples classes, which would generally be much more free flow. We would say, "Here is an exercise, what did you do with it?" And they would feed in, and we would then be able to talk to them either as a group or individually about that. Now, all of this then feeds into a more formal assessment pattern where they would do a formal marked assessment on their own, and they'd get written feedback on that. Sometimes we would give them direct personal feedback, but usually that would only happen if they ask lots of questions about it, but we do occasionally do it. Right, so as I see it, the problem when we went to mostly online teaching is we've lost a lot of these opportunities for interactions. So I'd insert into my recordings opportunities for them to do examples or exercises on their own, but I don't know that they're doing them. I certainly can't go round and look at what they're doing and say, "You've made a mistake there. This is how we'd fix it." I can't go back to something earlier and revise that the way I might in a lecture by using that input. And similarly, as far as feedback, the example classes, we're still running them, but to a large extent, students are sitting silently behind their cameras, not talking a lot. So there's much less of an opportunity to engage directly with students as I could if I was walking around a classroom and talking to them individually. They're very worried about talking in front of their peers. So maybe this isn't a problem. What am I losing here? What I'm losing is this individual contact, this ability to get to the bottom of why a student is misunderstanding a specific concept, or I would normally do some assessment of engagement and understanding in those sessions. So I'm losing this, and they're losing the opportunity to practice doing exercises. They're losing the ability to be quickly corrected when they've made a misunderstanding. If I have to go through a formal assessment process to check that they've missed something, then it's going to be 2 or 3 weeks after I taught the item, and that's probably fundamental to understanding the next thing that I'm going to be teaching. So they could have lost quite a considerable amount of information. And there's the point that we've lost a bit of pacing here. The structure of the normal mode of teaching is that we keep them going at a reasonable pace. If If we don't have all of this, then they're going to have they're going to be working at their own pace, and that may not be keeping up with the module. And as I say, it's often going to be building on itself. So the point is, when we're in this online world, we've lost a lot of these components that I would otherwise have been using to stay on top of student learning and hopefully keeping them on track. I don't want to have to send an email to every individual student to find out whether or not they know what's going on. So the problem, as I saw it, was how can I recover opportunities for student-initiated interaction about the problems they're having? And I think the key idea I had was I need to put in more assessments, which are just automatically marked for them, to indicate to them whether they've understood something or not. These can be simple assessments, but they have to be quick, and they have to indicate immediately, have you understood this or not? So this is in the form of quizzes or similar. Okay, so there were a couple of things I put in place for the module I was teaching this term. So the thing I'm talking about today is that I stuck in a short quiz based on a computer algebra package called Stack. And the students needed to pass each of those quizzes before they could move on to the next recording. So I'd set it up using the activity completion settings in Moodle. We also had a secondary thing, which I'm not talking about so much, which was that I had groups submit written work that was marked. Feedback was given to all students. That was all in written form, of course, but that's what we do for the most part in maths. We need written feedback because it's very hard to express specific mathematical issues in words. So I'm going to talk about these short quizzes. I've got a couple of quick examples. So this is what one of my Moodle pages looks like at the moment. So we've got a lecture which is not available until the previous quiz has been passed. That has a quiz associated with it, and they get the lecture slides that I used in the talk, and then that links on to the next lecture. If they've passed lecture, the fourth quiz, they get the access to the fifth quiz. And this sort of gives them some structure. It ensures they don't jump the queue in principle, and it ensures that they've understood what's in the previous lecture before they move on to the next one. So this is an example of the sort of question I'm asking. This is a relatively complex question. Most of the questions are more simple than this. We'd give them a maths problem. We ask them to input an answer. And in this case, we also asked them to do a calculation. I wanted to quickly show you the sort of feedback I'm doing, just so that you've got the context as well. So this is sufficiently anonymized. You can't see who the student was. I didn't think of this when I was writing the slides. Here is the sort of feedback I'm giving them. This isn't actually the most informative thing I've ever written. The student here has made a mistake that I hadn't thought of. So I've just told them to contact me about it. And in general, that happened. A lot of students did contact me if they couldn't work out what had gone wrong. The student has at least managed to find the correct numerical value. So in this case, most likely it's a syntax problem. This is one of the problems we had with this. It requires a certain amount of literacy with the computer program we're using, rather than just the maths. Right, so I was here. Hopefully that'll work. Yeah. Okay, so quickly going on. What do I see as the outcomes here? So I certainly got a lot more contact with the students than I would normally get. Now, that is partially replacing those sessions where I would be talking to them, going around classrooms, talking to them individually. But I got 250 emails from students for this module, and more than half of them specifically mentioned quizzes. I did a very crude search here. I just searched for whether or not quiz was in the title. So I suspect I've missed quite a few that were, in fact, related to quizzes. And the majority of those emails did involve significant misunderstandings of what the material was. And we were able to address that quickly by email, or on occasion, we were able to feed that into one of these online sessions and actually go through a problem without mentioning the student and explain what had gone wrong, so that everybody sort of got the benefit of that student having reported to me that they'd misunderstood something. So we were able to feed that in to the real to the teaching, as it were. Now, That's the other thing. Next thing. So, as far as student satisfaction with these quizzes were remarkably well received. I was expecting much more complaints about them than I actually got. This is a relatively small sample. Unfortunately, this was 13 out of a total of 65 who bothered to respond to this feedback session. But the majority are in your good or great category. Very few in this lower region. So I was reasonably happy with this. This was one of the highest scoring things I tested. They were also quite happy with the recorded lectures themselves. I think that's the only thing that outscored the quizzes.
Got a minute left,
I thought
Daniel.
the comments. So I asked for them to suggest one thing that was going well and one thing that was going poorly, which gave me a total of 20 comments out of 26 responses. 3 students didn't bother to input a comment. 6 of those specifically mentioned quizzes in a positive. 5 of them were specifically in a positive way, and the emphasis was really on this forces me to make sure I understand what was going on in the recording before I move on to the next thing. And that was one of the things I mentioned earlier. That was something I was looking for, and they'd picked up on it, and I hadn't told them that. So that was interesting. They saw the value that I had seen in doing this. There was one negative comment that was about the syntax issues that we were having when they didn't quite understand how to input their answers into the computer system. And so we managed to iron that out a bit by including more instructions about how to do a question in each quiz. To some extent, we're just stuck with the software we had available. Okay, and finally, the thing that I really care about when I do this sort of thing is it actually helping the students do better? I sort of care about student satisfaction, but mostly I care about them passing their exam and preferably doing very well on it. Frankly, that's what I think my job is. So I would have been quite happy if the students were unsatisfied that they'd been doing well. So this is a look at whether or not they'd completed all of these little quizzes on time before an assessment. So this is looking at the 2 weeks before an assessment, whether or not they'd complete at what rate they'd completed the 6 quizzes the 6 short quizzes they needed to do before one of these assessments. And we're looking at the fraction of the marks that they could have got on the quiz on the y-axis and this online completion rate, on-time completion rate on the x-axis. And we've got a reasonably strong correlation here between quiz completion and coursework marks. Obviously, there are some caveats there. You can see that for all that there's a strong correlation, you've also got people who did all the quizzes and didn't get very good marks. And you've got people who didn't bother to do any of the quizzes and still got a good mark. But on the general trend here, I would say, is that you've got a mix of abilities of different people have different ability on this particular set of problems, and overall, on average, you're seeing an increase if they actually did the quiz. So it looks like it is helping from that perspective, but obviously I need more data for that, really. And of course, there's this horrible line which goes down here and then goes up and isn't linear at all. I'm a bit of a statistician sometimes. So summing up, more or less on time, Phil probably told me that I needed to shut up, but
I think I was muted, Daniel, so you couldn't hear me, so that's all right.
It's all right. I had the audio muted because at the start of the talk I was listening to myself talk, probably through somebody else's computer, and it was quite distracting. So that's okay. I muted it. So I would say that the outcomes here, this did the job of getting the students to talk to me promptly. But it did add to my workload as a consequence, but I was willing to do that. It was fairly well received on the basis of the small sample I've been able to collect, and it does seem to improve learning outcomes, which is really what I'm looking for, noting the caveats I mentioned last time. This isn't really enough data to make a strong statement about that. I need to do some further work on the exam and the last assessment they've got. And the issues, there were some issues. A lot of students dodged these quizzes by watching with friends, which could also explain these students who are doing well but haven't taken any quizzes. There were some students inputted empty answers, reverse engineered my feedback to work out what the solution would be, which shows a degree of sense, but doesn't necessarily indicate that you've learnt the maths, which is what we're really going for. And there was, sadly, an increased workload for both me and the students. I had to write all of these quizzes. I won't have to do that again, at least. the students would have to do these things. Typically, I think the average time spent on this was about 15 minutes, which was longer than I had intended. I had intended these questions to be about 5 or 10-minute questions. Some students are registered as having taken hours on them. I think that's just the student opened the quiz and then started looking at the lecture notes to find out how to solve it. And
Daniel, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to stop you there. We've run over by about 5 minutes, which ate into our question time. So in the interest of keeping to time, would it be possible, Daniel, if you could jump into the chat and answer some of the questions?
I'll do that.
That would be so helpful. Thank you very much. But there were a few, because I know everyone was very interested in that. So thank you very much.